Now let's talk about what it's cost me to run this R8 over the past year and why I think it's cheaper than a performance Golf. Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now it's been about a year since I purchased my second Audi R8, this 2014 V8 Spyder S-Tronic. In that time I've done 3,000 miles in it, so I think now is a really good time to share with you the real world experience of living with Audi's entry-level supercar. So in today's video I'm going to go through the work I've done on this R8. I'm going to go through what it's cost me and why I think it's been cheaper to run over that time than a performance Golf. But before we get started by looking at the good and the bad bits of R8 ownership, let me just remind you guys how you can support the channel. The easiest way as ever is simply to subscribe. We're still getting a lot of views from non-subscribers. It's brilliant to get those views, of course it is, but it'd be even more brilliant if you guys could subscribe if you like what you see. Big thanks to everybody who has already subscribed. Your support is really much appreciated. Also, if you're in the market for an R8, and I think you probably should be, check out this coupe for sale at my friend's APS Specialist Vehicles in Brackley. It's super low mileage, it's got a really high spec, it's got a full service history, and because it's been sold by those guys, it will be in absolutely incredible condition. Now, call me shallow if you must, but the first three good things about owning this Audi R8 relate to the way it looks. Firstly, we have the timeless design. It was released in 2006 and I don't really think it's aged much at all. There are cars from that era that look very dated now. You cannot say that about the R8. I think the general man walking down the street, when he sees a Mark 1, he probably wouldn't be able to tell that it's quite a bit older than a Mark 2. What's also great is Audi's paint quality. It's always been better than Volkswagen, but I think with R8 they went next level on it, and that means that if you get some minor scratches, it's really easy and safe to polish them out because there's a lot of lacquer on it. What I also like is that Daytona Grey is a flattering colour. It's still in the Audi range because it shows off the lines of the car better than almost any other colour, but also it's very easy to live with. It doesn't show the marks that you get with blacks and navy blues. And another thing about this car as well is that it's got the rare option of the black styling package, which was £480, quite cheap, but not many people bothered with it. It's really important on the Spyder because as well as the usual black surround to the grille and the black exhaust tailpipe tips, you get black inlays in the hood cover, which are normally matte aluminium, and there's probably a bit too much bling there for my taste. What's also nice about the R8 is that it's quite a rare car, especially for an Audi. I think in the year that I've owned it, I could probably count the number of examples that I've seen in the UK and in Europe on one hand. And the main benefit of that is that it means that it doesn't really lose an awful lot of value. But that's something we'll talk about later in the video when we talk about the costs of running this one over the last year. Another good thing about this particular R8 is these Recaro Sports bucket seats. Now, they were a factory option when the car was new, £2,500, which is small beer in the great scheme of things. Bear in mind the car was like £80,000, £90,000. Yet not many people went for them because I think because it's an R8, they didn't really feel they needed to make it any racier by fitting racy seats. But so big ups to the guy who ordered this originally back in 2014. Now, these wonderful Recaro bucket seats have already been in the good bits about this car, but they're in the bad bits section as well because you're not allowed to recline them as much as you would want to. So that's as far back as they will go. And the reason is if you have the seat all the way back, which I don't because my legs aren't that long, and you recline it anymore, the back of the seat, which is hard plastic, will make contact with the bulkhead, which is also hard plastic, which is very frustrating because they're a little bit too upright for me. They're not as bad as Porsche carbon bucket seats in a GT4, but they're still not as comfortable as I'd like them to be on a long journey if they're that upright. Thankfully, there is a solution. And that solution is to pop this trim off the side of the seat, which is really easy, which will then reveal the mechanism for reclining the seat. All you need to do then is bend a tiny piece of metal, and that will then allow you to recline the seat as far as you want it to go, which on a nice sunny day will turn this R8 into a V8 sun lounger. Now, when you own an R8, what you really want to do is take it out of the UK and enjoy it on roads where you can get the most out of it, i.e. in the Alps, Italy, south of France. But when you try and pack for that kind of length trip, you find you are somewhat hobbled, and even more hobbled than in the coupe when you've got a Spyder, because the space behind the seats, which is quite useful on the coupe, is no longer there. So you're just left with the front trunk, or frunk as it's known. Now, it's not bad, but on a Boxster or Cayman, you've got this and a boot at the back, which does make all the difference. Also, a quarter of the depth of this frunk is taken up with the toolkit, plus on this Spyder, you've got the wind deflector, which you can put in position on the bulkhead if you want and leave it there while you're driving, but you can't see out the back window, which might be quite useful in case you get some unwanted attention. As a result, I've been to Bruges in this car for a few nights, packing with a douchebag soft sort of case, which makes all the difference. And that was okay, but as yet I haven't been able to convince my wife to go on a longer trip. Now, I noticed in a Harry's Garage video, he's got a McLaren at the moment, and in the hood well, when the hood's up, you can put luggage in there. And I've definitely considered doing that in this car, because if you don't put the hood down, there's a hell of a lot of space under that cover, though it does get quite warm, potentially can get quite wet, so it's maybe not designed for it. But I might just give it a try, see if I can get this car out on longer trips this year. Another bad thing about the R8, particularly in Spyder form, is that it's really difficult to service. Some of the bits are so hard to access, which I'll show you later. Also, something about S-tronic cars specifically is that they have a gearbox breather to allow the gearbox oil to breathe, because it gets really hot, and that has a breather pipe that breathes to atmosphere that's located just around here, and that creates an oily vapor that you notice generally when you've come back from a drive, which makes you think you've got an oil leak. It took me a while, but I pinned it down to the gearbox breather. Now, it turns out there's actually a recall for Mark II R8, so a couple of years later than this car, with this particular gearbox, because the oil from the gearbox can come out the breather, go on a hot engine or exhaust and cause a fire. That doesn't apply to this car, but it's probably something I might think about doing in the future. It won't stop the smell, but if you can smell oil, there's a good possibility that if you go on track or do other things that make the gearbox hot, it could come out and cause a fire. All the recall is to take the single breather tube, which has that much volume for the oil, and make it 2 to double the expansion space. Okay, now let's talk about the good and the bad when it comes to driving this Audi R8, starting with the bad bits, of which there are 4. The most annoying being when the car is cold like it is now, and that is to do with the gearbox. It's the S-tronic, which is the better of the 2 automatics you can have in the first generation R8, but it's still not perfect, probably because it originated in the Transporter T5, so it's basically a van gearbox. They don't tell you that in the advert, do they? And it's also similar to the one used in the TTRS and RS3. And when it's cold, it just takes a few more revs than is ideal to get it going. I mean, some days it's better than others. And it's only for the first sort of, well, actually manoeuvring off your driveway, maybe pulling off on the road. After that, it's perfectly fine. But sometimes you just don't want to make too much of a noise doing this. You want to do it quietly. It might be early in the morning, you might be going to a car show, and it's just a little bit too revvy, even with the exhaust valves shut. It's a lot better when it's warm. In fact, the gearbox actually makes it into the good bit section. Now let's talk about the ride quality. So this car's on passive dampers, which means if they need replacement, they're really cheap, as opposed to the mag ride that a lot of them have as a factory option on the V8, standard on the V10s. And it's great knowing that I'm not going to face thousands of pounds to replace a damper if I hit a pothole, but it does mean the ride is a little bit crashy. You do get used to it, and on the open road you don't really notice it. It's just like, you know, over speed humps or over imperfect urban roads, manhole covers, it just thump around a bit. And now for the other dislike, which is to do with the convertible hood. That's brilliant, you can do this at this kind of speed, that's great, but I'd rather have a more difficult top to operate than one that is so blowy when it's down. You'd think this is a big car, it's got big windows at the side, it wouldn't be particularly blowy. It comes with this little wind deflector as well as a wind deflector that's in the front. You'd think it cannot be blowy in here, but it is. I'm not even that tall, I'm not sticking that much over the top of the windscreen rail. It just makes me want to hunker down like this and keep my head down. Okay, on to the last of the 4 bad things, and that's to do with understeer. Now, Audis have been famous for bad handling, understeering fast cars for a long time. The R8 was a real surprise that it didn't understeer, but that wasn't really true. And if you drill down into some of the reviews, you will find that it does push on a fair bit when you go over the limits of the front tyres, which aren't particularly high. They're only 235s, and they've got a lot of weight to look after. The big difference compared to say an RS4 or an RS6 of this era is that once it starts to push, as long as you've got the revs up, you can neutralise it with the throttle, because this car, even though it's 4-wheel drive, the front wheels don't do an awful lot. It is primarily a rear-wheel drive car. It's certainly not too much of an issue on the road. You very rarely feel it, but you know, driving sort of responsibly on the road, it's very hard to get back on the gas to neutralise it. There's just not enough room. This is a big car, you know. Now, would you want the back coming out? No, because it would smack into that curb. Now on to the good bits, of which there are many. The engine is a real highlight, but we'll just wait for it to warm up a bit because it does take a while for the oil to get up to temperature. So in the meantime, let's talk about the refinement. For a convertible and for a sports car, it's remarkable. Unlike the GT4, which would give an aspirin a headache, this is a soothing cruiser, and it would be perfect for the drives down to the south of France or the Alps. And then when you get there, you can put it into sport mode, which opens the exhaust valves if they're working. Gives you lovely blips. It's not a particularly loud car, this first generation R8. The later V10s are really shouty with lots of pops and bangs. This is just more of a cultured V8, which suits me to perfection. If you want more, put it into sport mode. And another little party trick, which you can use all year round, is to drop the rear window on a Spyder. You can't do that on a coupe. So it does do a really good job of being Jekyll and Hyde, really refined when you want it to be, and then sufficiently sort of visceral when you're in the mood. Okay, now let's talk more specifically about the gearbox. So this is the S-Tronic, which came in with a facelift R8 for the 2013 model year, so registrations from the end of 2012 onwards. It's 7-speed, it's twin clutch, it's way better than the R-Tronic that you got with the first few years of production. Obviously it helps if it's warm, but once it's warm it's just so slick. And in sport mode it does these cheeky downshifts as well. See how quick this is now? It's sensational, it really is. I know a lot of journos bang on about the click-clack, open-gated, manual, and yes, it is, you know, fun to use it, although when I bought mine, which my coupe was manual, I was constantly looking at the gate to get used to it, just to make sure it was in gear, and I don't think I ever stopped doing that. And I'll never forget one day going around a roundabout selecting second. I actually selected reverse, which is next to second, and the parking sensors came on. Luckily I didn't release the clutch. God knows what would have happened if I did do that. So yeah, whilst it does, you know, it's a bit of fun to play with that click-clack initially, if you really want to get the most out of an R8, get the most out of the performance as well, because let's face it, 430 horsepower is not an awful lot. You do need the S-Tronic. Another good thing about this car is that it's running on passive dampers. Now I know they were in the bad bits as well because the ride is hard, but if you watch the RE Performance channel, they're an R8 specialist based in Swindon that most R8 owners will know about, and they'll probably have them on speed dial because that's where you take your car to if it ever breaks down. You'll know that replacing a mag ride damper, which was a factory option on the V8s, of which a lot of cars did have, and it would stand on the V10, costs a lot of money. Yes, the ride quality is not as good as I said in the bad bits section, but it's not terrible. And you can kind of drive it without worrying about the next pothole maybe costing you, I don't know, £2,000. Okay, now we can talk about the engine oil temperatures up to about 90. So where do we start? Well, it's a V8 4.2. We'll talk about the economy first, because it's 7 gears on the motorway. It's quite efficient. When I went to Bruges, I thought over 30 miles per gallon, which I was really pleased about. In real world, it's probably the low 20s, but still not bad, all things considered. Now, this engine got famous because of the B7 RS4, where it was sensational. Not really that torquey though, it does like to rev. One big benefit of the RS4 is that we've got twin intakes. In the RS4, all the air goes into a sort of one pipe into the throttle body, which does limit the airflow, and you just need, because it's not a turbo car, you need the air to get in the engine. So yeah, I'm much more inclined to rev out this car with the auto box. Also in sport mode, it is fully manual, so it will hit the rev limiter and stay there. The brakes are pretty good too, as long as you don't have to replace them. The ones on this car, they're okay, they've got a few more years left in them, and they're not over servoed at the top of the pedal. That's very un-Audi. Bit like a Porsche, the more you press the pedal, the more the car slows down. So let's just go from second at idle. Not much there, it won't kick down. There we go, 60 miles an hour. Do you really need the V10? You've got to ask yourself. It's heavier, apparently it's less balanced because it's got more weight over the rear, and it's significantly thirstier. Okay, now let's talk about the work I've done on this car since I've owned it. Just to remind you, it was bought from a non-specialist sort of prestige and performance car dealer called Auto 100 in Nottinghamshire. So it was, you know, prepared to some degree, but they didn't go to town on it, that's for sure. So pretty much as soon as I got it, I had to adjust the shut lines on the bonnet. The bonnet and I think the front bumper have definitely been painted. There's no sign of accident damage. The space frame is all original. The bonnet is original. So I think they just took it off to paint it, or somebody did. There weren't any chips when I bought it. I can only assume it was them. They did a really good job on the paint, but when it came to the details, they didn't do such a great job. But I can fix the shut lines. I can't fix any bad paintwork. So that was fine by me. At some point over the year, every one of the wheel arch liners has come off, and the screws that hold them, of which there are many, and they often seize in place, have been greased to stop them seizing in the future. Nothing is greased when it's assembled on this car, so it's just waiting to seize up. And it's about now, when they're 10 years old, that you'll start to take stuff off that's never been taken off before and find out it takes a bit longer than you planned. I fitted cruise control. That was done using second-hand parts. I replaced one of the wing to bonnet seals, which always fall off. I replaced the near side door lock, which the dealer covered under warranty. I changed the wheel colour from the original factory grey. So the car originally was grey, and it didn't really do it any favours. I went to Prestige Wheel Centre and I actually bought another set of wheels and had them done in silver and diamond cut, just to brighten the car up. I gave it a light machine polish and a coat of Collinite's wax. It was due an oil change in the spring, so I took it to APS in Brackley, made a video on that, so they could also inspect the car to give me peace of mind. So it was about 3 months since I bought it, and it was still under warranty, so it's worth doing. I protected all the steel bits that I come across, the struts and any brackets, with Built Hamburg Dynax UC cavity wax, which I've used on my Club Sport S and my Cayman GT4. When I went for the MOT, I said to the tester, oh yeah, the handbrake's a bit rubbish. I just lived with it, I hadn't really thought about it. It's really easy to adjust, so I've adjusted the handbrake as well. Probably the biggest job was when I decided to look and see if the exhaust flaps were operating correctly. They're not exactly that visible on this car, but you can see them through the mesh in the back bumper. Lo and behold, one was sticking. Tried lubing and moving it up and down, no joy. So the only thing to do is get the back bumper off. I noticed one of the exhaust flaps wasn't working. I had this problem on my Boxster. It cost me £1,000 for a new exhaust section on one side of the car. On the R8, so far nothing's broken. What's different with the R8 is that the actual linkage is adjustable. Let's got a couple of lock nuts in this bit in the middle that if you adjust it one way the rod gets longer or shorter the other way, and I think if they're too long they get stuck open or closed actually in the exhaust. So anyway, this is you can see that's pointing down there. If you press the sport button, there's no exhaust button on an R8. You can see now it's pointing upwards. Now, as you'll have seen in the bad bit section, I've modified the seat reclining mechanism to allow me to set it back how I want it to be. Also in here, I've replaced the standard boring grey floor mats with some branded mats with contrast stitching and contrast edge. And I've also replaced the black pedal covers, because stainless was a factory option this car didn't have, with some stainless covers which are admittedly from a Chinese supplier, but they fit really well. They look 100% right, and together I think they brighten up an otherwise pretty dull and drab cabin. Another job that I've only recently done is replace the back tyres. So the car came originally on grey wheels with Pirellis. I bought some silver wheels off eBay with Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's. Loads of tread, but they were 2018 manufacture, so they were getting on a bit. I didn't completely trust them. On reflection, I was lucky to get a year out of them, because recently I parked the car up, went back to it the next day, and one of the back tyres was flat. I took the wheel off, looked for nails, nothing there, looked for leaks around the rim, nothing there either. Eventually I found a little pinhole in the sidewall, which I've never ever seen before on a tyre. I thought it was a good time to put my hand in my pocket, because it's been such a cheap car to own generally, as you'll find out later, and put some good tyres on it so I don't have to worry when I go abroad, because it doesn't have a spare wheel, and having that issue when you're abroad would be a much bigger headache than it happening here. So I bought some new 4S's. I got them from Selly Oak Tyres Sturchley, which were about £1.50 more than Costco, but I didn't have to join Costco and all that, so I was super happy with the price. I should point out though, these are 295 30 19s. The originals were 305 30 19s. Now, a standard, the R8 comes with 295 30 19s, which what we've got now. If you go for a different wheel colour, they also give you a wider rear tyre. Now, I didn't go for the wider one because of the following reasons. A, 295 is cheaper, though that is a marginal concern. 295 is better on fuel, although again, that's marginal. The two main reasons are less grip on the back axle, and this car's got too much grip on the back axle. It doesn't really move its back end around. I don't even think 295s will make a bit of a difference, but it definitely does not need 305s on the back. Also, it's a proper Quattro, this car. It's not Haldex, and it's very important that the front and rear tyre sizes are very similar. Now, with the 305s, it's still a 30, so the tyres are a little bit bigger on the back. It's still within the tolerance Audi says okay for the front and rear tyres, as it would be, because it's the original factory fit size tyre, but going down to 295 makes the tyre a tiny bit smaller, and that brings it closer to the ideal ratio front to back. So there's less, ever so slightly less, wear on the differential if you run 295 30 19s with 235 35 19s on the front. Also, had to take both seats out in the end to fix the heated seat not working on this side. It was a bit of a mystery. With Vacom, it said it was 100 degrees, which meant that it wouldn't heat up because it was already too hot. So I stripped it all down. As soon as I stripped it down and used Vacom, it was back to being the right temperature and working. All I can assume is that the thermistor, which is the little disc connected by two wires, that is really where your bum is on the seat, had twisted on its wiring, and that had affected the resistance of it. It was causing it to read higher than it should be. So I straightened all that out, put it all back together. These seats are lovely and easy to work on because the covers are only held on by Velcro. I did change the fuel filter and the spark plugs and the air filters, and oh my god, the pollen filter. Okay, to get to the pollen filter, it's a really big job. Bigger than I thought, even though I'd done some research on this car, which I'll explain in a sec. Firstly, you have to remove the glove box. That is surprisingly fiddly, but when you know how to do it, it's okay. It's just first time for me. There's a bit of trunking there for the air that goes into the cabin from the airbox, well, actually to probably that vent there. Once you've got that out, you're then faced with the fuse box, which has got this cover on it, has to come off, and then you unclip a cable tie, do a few more nuts, and the fuse box just pulls forward. And then there's this subwoofer right in the way. Now, I had no idea this was bolted through the bulkhead, but there are the bolts. There is the screen wash tank. The pollen filters, by the way, I don't know if you can see, if it's light on, they go right in the back there to the right of that loom above that coil of wiring, and here they are. To be fair, they're actually pretty clean, so it looks like Audi did do them when they should have done 2021, so that is actually, yeah, 2 years. So they are due again on 2 years, but wow, I wouldn't be surprised if people leave them for the bigger services every 4 years. Anyway, I've done it now. Let me just show you what you have to do to get that speaker out. It's never a bad idea to do this because it gives you a good makes a lot of things visible that you just want to check up on anyway. Maybe spray a bit of wax to protect them. So you have to undo the trims that start off here, then the two side ones. You can just pop them out of the way though, and then you have to pop the center one off. To do that, you have to get the wipers off their spindles, which if you've ever done one before, you know they can be stuck on. You can see there's a bit of corrosion there, so they'll be greased when they go back on. You have to obviously try and avoid breaking the windscreen when you do that. And then you have to undo this bonnet stays as well, because they go through the plastic cover sort of there. And then you undo the washer fluid. Luckily it's not full, so it's not too heavy, off its brackets, and then you can just move that out of the way and get to the 13mm bolts that hold that in place. So yeah, now just a question of putting it all back. The filters I've got, I think I bought them off eBay. I was a bit worried they were going to be fakes, but actually they're not. They're just new old stock stuff. So somewhere on here it says 2021. You can see someone's written on it. Maybe they thought I maybe won't bother doing it on this car because it's such a pain to do it, but yeah, they look perfectly fine. So good marl and active carbon to match the ones that came out. It's only after you've done a pollen filter that you could find doing the spark plugs on an R8 easy. Lord knows how they fit 5 per bank in this chassis. Maybe there's less of a gap there, but 4's bad enough. So this is a Spyder, which in some ways is actually easier than the coupe, because you have these trims you have to remove on the coupe that are a real pain. On the back on this, you just put the hood in the service position and take out this panel that's got about 30 screws here, and then you get access to this, which isn't too bad. This side's okay. Over here you've got the coolant tank, which even when you undo it and strap it out of the way, is not really out of the way, but they're done now. NGK plugs in, same as the ones that I took out. There's always been a bit of a debate as to whether the Audi R8 is a supercar or not, and this will probably seal it because it's probably got the hardest fuel filter to change of any car. That's not officially in the service schedule, but it needs doing when the car gets 10 years because it can restrict fuel flow to the engine, and that's not a good thing obviously. It's harder on the Spyder, by the way. So on the coupe you just undo some trims under the glass sort of window for the engine. On the Spyder, look where they put it. So to get to this fuel filter, you have to strip the scoop, strip the side panel, and strip the sill cover, and then you have to fiddle around with some bloody annoying clips that are easy to damage. So yeah, definitely a supercar. Okay, now let's talk about what it's cost me to run this R8 over the past year and why I think it's cheaper than a performance Golf. We won't talk about insurance because it varies depending on how old you are and where you live, but we can talk about road tax. The R8 is an expensive car to tax, admittedly more than most performance Golf, so probably about the same as a Mark 5 Golf R32, which I think makes the 700 pil a year better value for an R8 because it's an R8, not a Golf. I kind of beat the system by not taxing the car though for the full year. I tax it for about half the year, which is £390, which isn't too far removed from taxing a normal car. It was due a full service this year, but I did most of that myself. I paid APS £300 for an oil change and inspection. The other bits, fuel filter, plugs, pollen filter, they come to about £100, so not really much to worry about, though it did take an awful lot of labour, which I did do myself. It had to have an MOT, which was 35 quid. I didn't need to change the number plates, that was 25 quid. The cruise control, it didn't need, that was 58 quid DIY fitted. The wheel refurb, it didn't really need. The original grey wheels were mint, that cost 300 quid at Prestige Wheel Centre because they're diamond cut, which costs a bit more. I did replace the door handle because it was a bit scuffed, but I didn't really need to do that, it was £100. I bought the R8 YOA number plate for 250 from DVLA. I definitely did not need to do that. I bought some tyres, which I just mentioned, £536. I've still got the original grey wheels with the Pirellis in the garage, so you could say I didn't need to do that, but we will include that. Pedal covers, £18.52, didn't need to do. Mats, £90 from Auto Style Multi-Keys, didn't need to do. That comes to £2,263 and 12 pence, but only about £1,000 of that was essential. So the servicing, the MOT, and I will let you have the tyres, even though they weren't really essential. So how has this car been cheaper to own than a performance Golf? Well, the answer is depreciation. When I bought this car, I bought it just after the crazy prices of 2021, 2022. The market had gone through a correction at the winter of 2023. I bought it just before Christmas, best time for buying a convertible as well. I looked at Auto Trader just now. I was a bit scared what I was going to see, but I was pleasantly surprised. It hasn't changed in value at all. A dealer would put this back up at the same price, if not more. And depreciation is the biggest cost of owning a car. So how much is a performance Golf like a Golf R going to lose in its first year of ownership? Is it going to be £5,000? I think that's not impossible. And okay, as they get older, it slows down, but where are you going to be in a couple of years? Maybe £2,000 a year, £3,000 a year? Well, you know, you're going to pay more for fueling this car, and it will depreciate, I guess, if you do more miles than I did, but it isn't going to be that different in cost to running a performance Golf. Let me know what you think in the comments. I mean, if you're paying £500 a month PCP, that's £6,000 a year. 6k does go a long way towards running this. Obviously, you have to have the money to buy the car in the first place, but you can get a personal loan. You pay it off for sure, but the asset that you're buying doesn't depreciate, and that makes owning cars like this quite affordable. But a bit of DIY is probably quite useful as well, and a bit of finger crossing as well, because if you get a big bill like a gearbox, etc., it's not really under warranty now at all. So yeah, you're going to have to foot that bill. But then, you know, performance Golf's probably not under warranty after you've had it for a year or two if you bought it second hand, or after 3 years if you bought it brand new, and you can still get big bills with those, I can tell you. Okay, finally, what are my future plans for this R8? Well, right now I have no plans to sell it. That's because I've done a lot of work on it in 2024, but I haven't actually done a lot of mileage. And in 2025, I want to basically enjoy the fruits of my labour. I think this is a really good road trip car because it will do the motorway schlep to the Alps or the south of France in, you know, relative refinement. But once you get to the good roads, put the roof down, open the exhaust flaps, and it would be an absolute riot. And that's why it's so frustrating that it's very difficult to get enough luggage in it to cover the days that you've got to be away for that kind of road trip. But I hope this year we'll be able to crack that, and I'll finally get to enjoy this R8 to the fullest. There is one little job I need to do before I'm confident enough to take it abroad, and that's to get the gearbox oil change. It's not actually part of the Audi schedule to be done as yet. It's based on mileage, but the car's 10 years old and 30,000 miles. It would be a false economy not to do it. I'm not sure I'm going to be brave enough to change the oil on my driveway. I'll probably take it to the guys at APS in Brackley to do it, but yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be done. As ever, guys, thanks for watching this Volkswagen video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.